Claire Whitmore thought she was stepping into a dream. After 8 months of long-distance calls, she finally landed in Athens, heart pounding, wedding ring already imagined on her finger. But that dream began to fracture the moment she entered Nikos Stavros' villa on the Aegean coast. The air smelled faintly metallic. The ocean breeze carried whispers that didn't sound like waves. And then, the basement door. It was locked, bolted and cold to the touch. Nikos' charming grin faltered for half a second when she asked about it. In that brief silence, the fairy tale she'd built began to crumble. By the time the police would arrive weeks later, that same door would reveal something so horrific it would make international headlines. The first night in Greece felt almost unreal. The scent of salt, jasmine, and wine. Claire lay awake, replaying every conversation with Nikos, every strange pause. His charm was magnetic, but something about the way he avoided talking about his family made her uneasy. He said his mother lived nearby, but her calls always went unanswered. When Claire finally drifted off to sleep, she dreamt of footsteps echoing under the floorboards, slow, deliberate, and coming from below. Morning sunlight poured through the villa. Nikos brewed coffee like nothing was wrong, humming softly to a Greek tune Claire didn't recognize. She wanted to shake the feeling off, the strange dreams, the basement, and focus on love. But as she watched him slice fruit with deliberate precision, she noticed tiny scars on his wrist, faint but old. When she asked about them, he smiled and said, "From my military days." His tone was too rehearsed. Claire smiled back, but inside, her heart whispered a warning she wasn't ready to hear. Later that day, Nikos took her into the city. The Acropolis in the distance, the chaos of Athens around them. Everything seemed perfect on the surface. He held her hand, introduced her as his future wife, but the glances from locals were strange. When Claire mentioned his name to a cafe owner, the woman's expression froze for a split second before forcing a smile. Stavros," she murmured, eyes flicking toward Nikos, then quickly away. That fleeting silence told Claire more than any word could. That night, back at the villa, the wind howled harder than before. Claire stepped onto the terrace to call Mark, but the signal was weak. "He's perfect," she said softly, though her voice trembled. Mark's reply came through static. "Check his background, Claire. Something's off." But before she could answer, she heard the basement door rattle. Just once, then silence. When she turned back, Nikos stood in the doorway behind her, expression unreadable, eyes reflecting the cold gleam of the moon. Nikos was the perfect host, or so it seemed. He took her to ancient ruins, the bustling Plaka markets, even a private boat tour across the Aegean Sea. But behind his smiles, something was slowly starting to unravel. Claire noticed his odd mood swings, warm and affectionate one moment, distant and distracted the next. He never talked about his past, only focusing on the present. And Claire, despite herself, began to ask more questions. What was he hiding? Why did no one in Athens seem to know him well? His world felt curated, pristine, but also fragile. The more Claire tried to connect with Nikos' world, the more distant he became. Conversations about his childhood turned into evasive answers. He didn't want to talk about his family, or the strange lack of information about his past. Claire had tried Googling his name, but nothing substantial came up. One evening, after an awkward silence at dinner, Claire finally asked the question that had been gnawing at her. "What happened to your father?" Nikos' eyes darkened, his fork scraping harshly against the plate. He didn't answer. Instead, he suggested they go out for a walk. The tension between them thickened. Claire started to feel like a guest in a house she wasn't sure she wanted to stay in. The next morning, while Nikos was out, Claire decided to do a little digging. She went through his things, nothing too intrusive, but enough to raise suspicion. She found a passport tucked under his bed, pages worn but with a strange set of stamps she didn't recognize. Some dates didn't add up. Claire felt an eerie chill when she realized that some of the dates aligned with disappearances of foreign women across Europe. She took a photo of the passport, but before she could delve deeper, she heard Nikos' voice downstairs, and her heart skipped a beat. That afternoon, Claire took the photo to the local police station. Detective Eleni Karas looked at her with a raised brow. But when Claire mentioned the missing women, Karas' eyes darkened. "You're not the first to come to me with concerns about Nikos Stavros," she said. "But there's never been enough proof to investigate." The detective's voice was low, almost as if she was afraid someone might overhear. Claire felt the weight of the words sink into her chest. The deeper she looked, the more she understood she wasn't just dealing with a man hiding secrets. She was dealing with a man who might be hiding something far more dangerous. By the time Claire returned to the villa, the feeling of being watched had grown unbearable. Nikos was waiting for her, standing in the doorway, his expression unreadable. "You've been gone longer than I expected," he said, the coolness in his voice slicing through the air. Claire tried to keep her composure, but her hands were shaking. She could feel the walls closing in. The basement door was locked again. And yet, in her gut, Claire knew she would have to open it, even if it meant confronting the dark truth lurking below. The unease Claire felt in the villa was no longer something she could ignore. Nikos' charm had begun to feel like a mask hiding something far darker. That night after their dinner, Claire did the unthinkable. She began snooping through his things. She found old photographs of Nikos from his childhood, but there was something strange about them. They didn't match his current appearance. A young boy with lighter hair and a different face stared back at her from the pictures. It was as if his identity had been wiped clean, and Claire's heart began to race. What was he hiding, and why had he erased his past? Unable to shake the feeling that she was missing something important, Claire tried to dig deeper. She asked Mark to run another search on Nikos, but this time she didn't just look up his name. She searched for the women who had gone missing across Europe in the last few years. What she found sent a chill down her spine. There was a pattern: women who matched Claire's description, women who had fallen for men like Nikos. And in each case, the trail went cold when they arrived in Athens. A creeping terror took root in her chest. Was she next? Feeling a growing sense of dread, Claire decided to confront Nikos. She took the photo of the passport, the one with the unusual stamps, and asked him outright about his past. Nikos' face went pale, his eyes flickering with something she hadn't seen before: fear. He tried to laugh it off, but his voice was tight. "My past is complicated, Claire," he said, stepping closer, "but you need to trust me." For the first time, Claire saw the mask slip. His smile no longer reached his eyes. The warmth in his voice felt like a lie. As she watched him back away, the walls closing in around her, she realized how little she actually knew about the man she was supposed to marry. The following morning, Nikos was distant. He barely spoke as he prepared breakfast, his movements stiff. It was as though a barrier had risen between them. And Claire couldn't shake the feeling that something had shifted. Her phone buzzed with a message from Mark. "I've been digging. You need to leave. Now." Claire felt the blood drain from her face. Her friend was right. This wasn't just a man with a few secrets. This was a predator. But as she turned to confront him, she saw something she hadn't expected: a locked door, behind which the echoes of his true self waited. And Claire knew that she couldn't leave without facing what was behind it. That afternoon, Claire could no longer wait. She had to see what lay behind the basement door. While Nikos was out, she found the key, hidden under a loose floorboard in his bedroom. Heart pounding, Claire made her way to the basement. The air grew cold as she approached the door, the lock heavy in her hand. When the door creaked open, she was hit by the smell, stale, metallic, like blood. And then, as her flashlight swept across the room, her eyes locked onto the first thing that made her heart stop: a wall, covered in photographs. Photographs of her. Photographs from the last few months, each one taken from a distance. She wasn't just a guest in his villa. She was a target. The walls of the basement were lined with photographs, each one a snapshot of her life since she'd arrived in Greece. The realization hit her like a punch to the gut. She hadn't just been a guest in Nikos' world. She had been a part of his twisted game all along. The air in the room was thick with something that made her stomach churn. It wasn't just the photographs. It was the other things. She saw items that didn't belong to her, scattered across the floor. Clothes, jewelry, foreign passports. And beneath it all, a concrete slab. With her heart racing, Claire tried to back away, but her foot hit something solid. Looking down, she saw a suitcase she recognized. It was hers. It hadn't been there when she first arrived. Panic coursed through her veins as she pulled at the lid. Inside was her favorite jacket, folded neatly, but beneath it, a collection of her belongings, the things she thought she had lost. Everything was there, but it wasn't the items that terrified her. It was the way they were placed, almost like a trophy, a reminder of her inevitable fate. Claire's breathing became ragged as she backed away from the suitcase, but the concrete slab in the corner of the room drew her attention. There was something unsettling about it, something that felt like a final piece of the puzzle. She needed to see what was underneath. In a frantic panic, Claire grabbed a nearby tool and began to chip away at the concrete, her mind screaming that she had to get out. But her hands moved instinctively, desperate for the truth. As the concrete gave way, her eyes widened in horror. The blood drained from her face as she uncovered the unmistakable shape of a body, or what was left of one. The moment the body was exposed, Claire's legs gave out beneath her. She collapsed to the floor, gasping for air. Her eyes refused to believe what they saw, but the scent, the unmistakable, sickening scent of decay, told her everything she needed to know. She turned to run, but the sound of footsteps behind her froze her in place. Nikos was standing in the doorway, his eyes cold, his lips curled into a faint predatory smile. "You shouldn't have seen that, Claire," he said softly. "Now you're part of it too." Nikos stepped further into the basement, his voice low and eerily calm. "I've been watching you, Claire, watching how easily you fell for the illusion I created. It was almost too easy." Claire scrambled to her feet, adrenaline flooding her system, but Nikos didn't move. He just stood there, smiling, as if savoring every moment of her panic. "You're not the first, and you won't be the last," he said, as if discussing the weather. Claire's mind raced. She had to get out. She couldn't let him win. The moment of clarity was sharp and fleeting. She bolted past him, pushing through the door, but Nikos' hand caught her wrist with terrifying speed. "You can't leave now, Claire," he whispered, pulling her back into the darkness. "You're mine." With her heart pounding in her chest, Claire fought to pull her wrist from Nikos' grip. But he was stronger than she imagined. His eyes burned with an unsettling intensity as he dragged her back toward the basement, the darkness swallowing them both. "You can't leave now," he whispered again, the words ice cold in the silence. His voice was so calm, so sure, as though he knew this was only the beginning of a terrifying game he had already won. But Claire's survival instinct kicked in. She had to break free, or she would never leave this place alive. Claire's mind raced as Nikos pulled her back into the basement, the air thick with the scent of decay. Panic surged through her, but she knew she had to think fast. She couldn't let him win. With a sudden surge of strength, she twisted in his grip, using every ounce of energy to break free. Her elbow connected with his stomach, and for the first time, she saw him falter. It wasn't much, but it was enough. Claire seized the moment, running toward the basement stairs, her breath ragged and fast. Claire reached the top of the basement stairs and ran down the hallway toward the front door. Her feet barely touched the ground as she ran, every instinct screaming for her to get out. She could hear Nikos behind her now, his footsteps growing louder. He was gaining on her. The villa seemed to close in around her, the walls pressing tighter with each passing second. She reached the door, her hands trembling as she fumbled with the lock. Just as she was about to turn the handle, a shadow appeared in the doorway. Nikos. His voice was cold and measured. "You think you can run?" he said, stepping forward slowly. "You'll never escape me, Claire." Claire's fingers found the lock, but her hands were shaking too badly to turn it. Nikos was too close now. Her mind raced for a solution, but everything she'd learned about him, the surveillance, the control, the lies, began to piece together in her mind. He wasn't just obsessed with her. He wanted to own her, to keep her trapped in this nightmarish world. With one last burst of adrenaline, Claire spun around and hurled the nearest object at him. A glass vase. It shattered on the floor, the loud sound sending him stumbling back just long enough for her to make a run for it. Whoa! Claire ran into the night, her legs burning with every step. The villa behind her felt like a distant nightmare. But she knew Nikos wouldn't let her go that easily. Her breath was ragged, and her heart pounded in her ears, but she couldn't stop. The moonlight bathed the road ahead, offering the briefest glimpse of hope. As she rounded a corner, she saw headlights in the distance. A car. She ran toward it, praying it would stop. It did. The driver's window rolled down, revealing Detective Eleni Karas. "Get in," she said, her voice urgent. "We've been tracking him. You are not alone anymore." The Greek police had been waiting for this moment. The tip-off, the evidence. Detective Eleni Karas led the charge, her face grim as she directed the team through the villa. Nikos Stavros had finally been captured, but it wasn't over yet. Claire's testimony was crucial, and she had shown them the path to the basement, the place where everything had started to unravel. The moment they opened the door, it was clear that Nikos' crimes went beyond the confines of his villa. The evidence inside was overwhelming. Photographs, personal items, and a gruesome collection of keepsakes from his past victims. The real shock, however, came when they discovered his true identity, a man who had been using different names for years. As the police dug deeper into the evidence, they uncovered a chilling pattern. Nikos had been operating for years, moving between countries, targeting women like Claire, vulnerable, trusting, and easily deceived. Detective Karas couldn't believe the scope of his crimes. There were reports of missing women dating back to his time in Switzerland, then France, and now Greece. But it was Claire who had unwittingly exposed the missing link, the key to finally bringing Nikos down. His obsession with her had been his undoing. He had underestimated her courage, and now his world was collapsing around him. Back at the station, Claire sat with Detective Karas, recounting everything she knew. Her hands were still shaking, but her voice had steadied. Nikos was in custody, and the police were piecing together the full picture. Claire had learned the hard way that the man she had once loved was not the person he had pretended to be. He was a master of manipulation, someone who knew how to blend into society, hiding his true nature behind a veneer of charm. But now, with the walls closing in around him, Nikos' facade was crumbling. Detective Karas was determined to ensure that no one else would fall victim to him again. The investigation soon uncovered the full extent of Nikos' twisted world. It turned out that his mother, Lydia Stavros, had been complicit in his crimes, helping him cover his tracks over the years. She had always been a shadow in the background, a figure who never questioned her son's actions. It was as if she was blind to the monster he had become. Or worse, she was a willing accomplice. Detective Karas was horrified by the discovery, but there was no time to waste. Nikos had built a network, and it wasn't just about him anymore. The investigation would now extend across borders, pulling in international law enforcement to track down the people who had helped him. As Nikos was taken into custody and his mother was questioned, Claire could finally breathe a little easier, though the weight of what had happened still clung to her. She knew she would never fully escape the trauma of her experience, but she had survived. And now, thanks to her bravery and Detective Karas' persistence, the world would know what kind of man Nikos Stavros truly was. The investigation would continue. But for Claire, it marked the end of one chapter and the painful beginning of healing. In the weeks that followed, the media would swarm, reporting on the shocking details of the case. The disappearance of multiple women, the manipulation, The chilling control. Nikos' reign of terror was over. The world woke up to the name Nikos Stavros. His face flashed across every news network. The charming fiancé turned international predator. As investigators pieced together his crimes, the scope became staggering: 5 women, each from a different country, all lured by the promise of love. Claire's escape had not only saved her life, it had exposed a monster hiding behind a mask of sophistication. In interviews, Detective Karras called it a tragedy of trust. But to Claire, it wasn't just tragedy. It was survival. Every headline reminded her how close she'd come to disappearing like the others. In custody, Nikos refused to speak. For days, he sat in silence, his sharp eyes watching every officer who passed his cell. Detective Karras visited him one final time, determined to get answers. "Why then?" she asked. But Nikos only smiled, that same rehearsed, chilling smile that had once fooled Claire. "They came to me," he said quietly. "They wanted love. I only gave them what they asked for." Karras stared at him, disgust curling in her gut. There was no remorse, no humanity left in him. Only control. Even now, from behind bars. Weeks later, Claire sat in the Athens courthouse, her hands trembling as she faced the man who had once promised her forever. Nikos looked the same, calm, collected, and disturbingly unbothered. But something had changed in her. Fear had turned into fury. When she took the stand, her voice was steady. She spoke for the women who couldn't, for the ones whose faces lined the basement walls. Her words painted a vivid portrait of manipulation, charm, and terror, the tools Nikos had wielded to destroy lives. And when the judge read the sentence, life imprisonment without parole, Claire exhaled for the first time in months. When it was over, Claire returned to the sea, the same coastline where her nightmare began. The Aegean breeze carried a quiet kind of peace this time. She stood barefoot on the sand, staring out at the endless blue horizon. Every wave felt like a heartbeat, steady, alive. She wasn't the same woman who had arrived in Greece dreaming of love. That woman had died in the basement, replaced by someone stronger, someone who had looked into the eyes of evil and lived to tell the story. In a quiet cafe near the harbor, Detective Karras joined Claire for one last conversation. No talk of the case, just 2 survivors of the same storm. "You saved more lives than you know," Karras said softly. Claire smiled faintly, stirring her coffee. "I just wanted to live," she replied. Karras nodded. "And because you did, others will." Outside, the world moved on. Tourists laughing, boats sailing, but somewhere beneath it all, the echoes of what happened in that villa remain. A silent warning whispered by the Aegean wind: trust can be the most dangerous illusion of all.